Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Depending on where you are joining us from globally, it's an honor to be here, and it's a pleasure. You're welcome to the Future Social Finance panel, and you're welcome back to the People's Social Impact Conference 2025, Day 6. This is the final day of our fifth annual social impact gathering. It's been a fantastic past few days. Every session has been amazing. Um, we greatly appreciate all the brilliant leaders that came together to make this possible. My name is Clement Asena, founder and executive director of BIPOC Foundation, a national nonprofit organization headquartered out of Lethbridge, Alberta, and it's an honor to be your host for this remarkable session. So grab your notes and your pens and get ready to dive in. As always, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stewards whose shoulder we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. We will now bring our panel on the future of social finance in Canada. We have four remarkable people that you'd want to meet for sure, that you'd want to listen to. The first one here is Artie Freeman. Artie is the CEO of Definity Foundation. We have here with us today Dania Pasushik, the CEO of Tamarack Institute. We also have Michael Toy, the chair of the Social Innovation Advisory Council. And lastly, we have Graham Sink, the CEO of Relevin. We're just going to dive right in. We're going to start with Artie. Please introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers and tell us about your remarkable work.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And hello to everyone on line today. And many thanks to SETC, first of all, for putting on an incredible past week. The panels were astounding, and I certainly learned a lot. So really gratitude to SETC for that. So I am Artie Freeman, and I am CEO of Definity Foundation. Our mission is to advance health, climate, socioeconomic justice, really with a view to advance community-led solutions to systemic barriers, particularly those faced by Black, Indigenous, and racialized peoples. So at the foundation, we're really committed to equity and justice. One of the ways we do this is by exploring how to move beyond traditional grant making and really use integrated capital in ways that drive systemic change. So if I had to put something in a nutshell, I'd say it's at the intersection of philanthropy, social finance, and justice, and that's where we'd find our sweet spot.
Thank you so much, Artie. Next, we're going to get Danya to please introduce yourself and, share with our listeners.
Thank you, Clement. Merci à tout le monde. My name is Danya Pastuzik. I use she, her pronouns. I am here today as a steward of Tamarack Institute for Community Engagement. With incredible gratitude, this event is one that I've now had the pleasure to be part of as a learner 3 years in a row. And I find it is such an amazing place, Artie, as you said, to come into relationship, not just with new people, but with new ideas and with new roles that we can each inhabit in these spaces that we occupy right now. As I mentioned, I am with Tamarack. Tamarack is focused on contributing to ending poverty in Canada. We've set a goal that by 2030, poverty will be below 5% in Canada. This will mean currently creating systems where more than 2 million more people can move out of conditions of social, economic, climate, and other types of poverty. We do our work through three main strategies. First, we deeply believe, like many of you, that this work is about people. And so we do lots of work to try to build people's capability to teach each other and learn from one another about different ways to collaborate toward really bold change. The second thing we do is stay in relationship with many, many communities across these lands. We are currently in relationship with over 180 local collaboratives of businesses and government and lived experience experts and people that are part of the social sector. who are working on community plans to really get at the deep, deep roots of some of what causes different types of poverty in their communities. And then finally, we work on policy and we work on perception. One of the things that we work to do is to build and recognize and really elevate the power that exists when different people and communities can come together around things that matter to them. So currently doing a lot is present in decision making at all levels. So thanks again for having me, and thanks for being part of this ecosystem, everyone.
Thank you so much, Danya. Next up, we'll have Graham. Introduce yourself
Thanks.
to our guests.
Thanks, Clement. Good morning to you and my fellow panelists and to everyone joining on the call. I have to say, I love the kind of call where people can just accidentally put their video on from wherever they're joining. It makes me feel like we're together as colleagues. And I like that it's not kind of like the lockdown panel. And it's great. So Graham Singh from the Relevant Foundation in Montreal. Bienvenue, bonjour à toutes et à tous. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous. Nous, on travaille avec l'immobilier religieux. We work with the transition of religious property, giving rise to community through those transitions. And the primary transitions are to community hubs where other non-religious organizations share those existing buildings, or where we demolish the existing building and there is new housing built. And we're delighted to have now somewhere over 2,000 units of housing in production or some kind of stage of pre-development. At this point across Canada, we just had an announcement of a 600-unit development in Burnaby, and we have over $100 million that has been released for community good through those properties. And we have about 12,000 places of worship in Canada, 17,000 religious properties in total. We could end on-street homelessness just using empty monasteries. And that really stirs us and keeps us moving into action. We have not been hesitating to work with political parties on all sides in trying to understand this existing social purpose real estate at this time. And it's something I'd like to address in the call is, how are we dealing with this particular political environment? And as crazy as it is, I think we're all used to a little bit of crazy. Maybe we're a bit tired from it. Maybe we're thinking about what is this season of social finance? And those are things we're thinking of as well. Clement, before I hand back to you, just to say very clearly in terms of social finance, we have created a fund with the help of many colleagues and encouragers and investors indeed, including some on this call, including from the Definity Insurance Foundation. And that fund is aimed to be a mortgage fund for charities and nonprofits who are looking to acquire a closed religious property. And we are in the final stages of getting our first close of that fund accomplished. And when everybody told me, it takes 5 years to build a fund, Graham, I thought, well, it'll take you 5 years, but it's not going to take us 5 years. I mean, we're moving, it's a social finance fund, and this is going to happen much faster. Well, they were right. I was wrong. Hopefully, we're going to be a little bit less than 5 years. But boy, it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy. We've learned a lot. We have a lot of wins. We also have one or two frustrations at this time of the government changing one way or the other. And we're trying to remain positive in a time of change. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Next, we have Mike. Can you please introduce yourself and share with us the work that you do?
Thanks, Clément. Yes, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Me plaisir d'être avec plusieurs visages familiers aujourd'hui. And congratulations, of course, as others have said, to SETC for this amazing rassemblement, bringing people together, and the power you use with such care and wisdom around that. I'm pleased to join you from the traditional territory of the Wabanaki Nation, the people of the rising sun, in what's now known as Victoriaville, Quebec. My name is Mike Toy, I go by he, him pronouns. I'm chair of the Social Innovation Advisory Council, which provides advice to the Federal Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development, Jenna Sudds, on the implementation of social innovation and social finance strategy. And I'll pop a link in the chat there if people haven't heard about that and want to find out more. And also until last November, I was with the Canadian Community Economic Development Network as executive director for 16 years and in other roles before that. That's a national association of organizations and individuals working for more inclusive and sustainable economies by supporting peer learning and policy advocacy. And SEDNet, along with the Table of Impact Investment Practitioners and the Institute for Sustainable Finance at Queen's University, hosted the third annual Sustainable Finance Forum last November, Graham, of course, was one of our MCs, and Artie was a dynamic speaker. And so I'm going to be drawing a lot on some of the ideas and content from that event in my comments today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. We're just going to stay with you and we'll go straight to the questions. How can social finance models evolve to better address systemic inequalities? And what role do public-private partnership play in scaling these solutions?
That's great. Well, Graham will be able to speak more to this directly, but one of the speakers at the Sustainable Finance Forum was a guy by the name of Tony Pringle from Quinn and Partners. And he said that they did a report with Graham's support and partnership with TIP and others that estimated the size of the impact investing space in 2022 to be about $14.4 billion. I think it was as an estimate by the Responsible Investment Association. So if they're able to continue to mobilize capital similarly in recent trends, globally at least in impact investing, we're looking at over $45 billion by 2030 that's intentionally seeking to address environmental and social challenges. My question is how much of that is actually going to be controlled by the communities it's intended to serve? Right? For many years, I was witness to the somewhat stale debate between the supply and demand side of capital, with the supply side folks saying there's no pipeline of viable projects, and the demand side saying, the SPOs who needed the capital saying there's no actually flexible and available. Black communities who receive the Black Philanthropic Endowment Fund, National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association that are managing a portion of the Social Finance Fund through the Indigenous Growth Fund, or many other examples that the money serves its intended purpose best when it's owned and managed by the people it's intended to benefit. And at the Sustainable Finance Forum, Victoria Hirth, who opened our 2 days with keynotes, said that if you get the governance right, the long-term thinking is the consequence of that governance system. And that's what allows acting and thinking in a way that's anchored to contribution to long-term well-being. Her larger frame that she was sort of pointing towards was being purpose-driven. But I think the fundamental point that governance is key is what we need to remember. And on your panel, Graham, I'm sorry if I'm stealing all your nuggets here, but Wahi Deer from Raven Indigenous Outcome Fund, she said a quote that really resonated with me on that session. She says, start with what you're trying to achieve and be accountable to that. It's not the effort, the money, or the input they're going in with. It's how you're accountable to the people that you're working with. And Shannon Matadawabin from the National Aboriginal Corporations, Capital Corporations Association said that, when it comes to partnering with First Nations, ensuring free, prior, and informed consent is the prerequisite. But then that partnership really means, can mean lots of different things, but it's about equity participation, impact benefit agreements, revenue sharing. Those are what demonstrate real partnerships with First Nations and makes First Nations communities feel like they're a true partner. So I'm wary of partnerships that rely on benevolence. People change in companies, times change. Don't rely on goodwill. DEI, we're seeing now, is facing a backlash, right? Is it time for some companies who maybe fair weather friends to move on? Can they get a bigger bang for their CSR buck or image by doing something else that looks good? Real partnerships involve the people who have historically had power, sharing that, ceding it power and control, building power for the communities that need it. And if you can secure partnerships that actually build your assets and autonomy and scope of action, that's the way I'd go.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you very much. Next, we would like to hear your perspective on this conversation, Graham.
Thanks, Clement. I love that we're bringing pieces of this Sustainable Finance Forum into this conversation. I think it's a big vision of SETC to make sure that this information and these conversations are being made accessible. And I think that's a very wonderful thing that we're doing in the ecosystem to bring these conversations in. And it also, there has been a number of months since that gathering, and things have changed. And I would jump on to what Michael was saying there. I think one of the keys is this really repayable finance? So back to your question, Clement, how is it going to evolve? I think one of the things I see a lot is we want to see system change. And when we go to government, we expect government to pay for that because government is under a social contract with all society to deal with places where the market fails, right? That's government's job. But where government says we're going to create a social finance fund, we're talking about repayable capital. Something I have said to our stakeholders and friends, and including some on this call, is if I were to go back and look at this past, especially 5 years, and the amount of time that we have spent with government, right? Taking this issue, what are we going to do with all the closed religious properties? We spent so much time with government. If only I had have spent that much time with the banks, I think we would have been a little further ahead. And now, as we watch these political changes, watch an evolution, we're going to have to be spending our time more there. And as I look at some that we're talking to, we actually have a project right now that just called us and said, we didn't really believe any of the things you told us. They didn't say that to us in that way, but that was kind of what they were saying. So we just went to the Royal Bank of Canada to see if they would give us a loan. And they got so I don't mean nothing against that particular bank. They would have got the same response from any bank. This is a group of charities with this piece of social purpose real estate wanting a loan. And the bank just said no. They didn't say no for the following reasons. But then we went back and said, why is it that they're not able to? But the discipline of going to the bank in some ways is better than going to the government because you know that they're talking about a serious loan. Whereas when you go to government, you kind of think there's a soft edge to it. Well, that's one of the lessons from the Social Finance Fund. It is a real fund. These are real data rooms, real repayable capital. And I think getting more serious about it, we're going to have to. We actually were supposed to be doing that in the first place. And it's a good lesson. Second is the evolution in philanthropy. And I have no risk of shouting at philanthropy with Artie on the call because Artie's leading the way on this from the foundation that she leads. But there are others. We're talking about more than $150 billion worth of endowed foundation money in Canada. That's money that was not paid out in capital gains tax largely or in income tax. And it's sitting with foundations with the expectation that they're going to be doing the work of charity as defined by the Charities Director of the Canada Revenue Agency. And that money needs to get out to those purposes. It is not getting out fast enough. And right now, an evolution, I woke up this morning. I don't know if some of you are like this, so you wake up with a letter in your head. I wake up with 2 or 3 letters in my head every day. I thank God for ChatGPT, who's my new friend. I pray to God and then I open ChatGPT and I'm like, God, and then I read the letter to ChatGPT and ChatGPT is always so patient with my letters. It's a lot easier on my wife that I don't have to just burden her with that. And I write these letters. And the latest letter is an open letter to Canada's endowed foundations to say, listen, you see where government is going, folks. All this softly approach of Canada's foundations when it comes to impact finance, we don't have time anymore. We need to accelerate that radically. We need to see the doors open of Canada's foundations and realize as government doors are closing, which they are both for elections, as well as we know that whichever political party comes into power, we're going to be very constrained. This is a time for foundation doors to move forward. Otherwise, this dream of social finance we've been having, the dream's going to be over pretty quick if we're not careful. So that would be the second evolution I would point to is where philanthropy goes. And the third, in the same way as getting real, of a bunch of charities go to a bank and ask for a loan. That's very real, right? We need to be in that place in many cases. Let's get more real about our institutional funds, okay? Some of them are going to invest equity in these funds, but not many. A lot of them need to be using debt. And in order to use debt, we need layers of guarantees. And we need to be much more serious about use of large balance sheets, the largest being our federal government, to make the kinds of work we're doing appropriate for institutional funds. We can't just expect to go to a pension fund and say, don't you see how our work's going to change the world? You should invest. It just doesn't work that way. But I just don't think we've been quite as serious as we could be in actually creating the instruments that are going to work for them. So those are the 3 evolutions I would point to. Getting serious about repayable capital at the SPO level, kicking the foundations into high gear, and especially those that are already in high gear can do the kicking for us. We just need to remind them, please keep kicking, Artie. And then really we need to be looking at issues like, for instance, larger scale bond issuances, which we did cover in the Sustainable Finance Forum, and it's an echo I would like to bring forward to this conversation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Next, Danya, would you like to share some perspective on this topic?
Wow, thank you both so much. I just want to comment first on the framing of this question. I just love this wording. This wording of moves towards. You ask, as Canada moves towards a more sustainable and inclusive economy. I really see that we are moving toward this economy. And I wish that everyone should have exposure to some of the things that me and my colleagues have exposure to. The kinds of economy building happen on Fogo Island, the kinds of work happening at this convening, the kinds of work happening in the 180 local collaboratives that I mentioned earlier, because we really are moving toward this economy in many places, even if what's being amplified by many sources of information tell us something different. Both things are true. We have work to do, and also we are in many very local places moving toward this economy. In terms of how social finance models can evolve to help us better address the systemic inequities, I agree with so much of what my colleagues have said here. And I'll just add a few things. I'll add first that I think it really starts with self. I come into this conversation with a lot of humility. I haven't been working in Canada that long. I don't consider myself deeply knowledgeable about the different social finance tools. What I can say is that, ever since I started working with refugee entrepreneurs in the early 2000s, I started to see examples of social finance, working, as perhaps some of you have, or having exposure to the amazing no interest revolving loan funds that newcomer communities in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Nashville, Tennessee, and Staten Island, New York, and so many other places across these lands have set up. That was really my first exposure to social finance. And so I think, one thing we can really do is start with self and start with where we might not have exposure to the constraints that exist in building the kind of ecosystem that we want to build, building the kind of transfer of capital that Graham and Mike described that we all want to move toward. Another way I think the models can continue to evolve is to really, as I mentioned before, have as their starting place the needs of communities. There's a lot of talk about the tools. I think, as I mentioned before, the tools can be very challenging to understand. And I really wonder if we can do more of the kind of work that I see happening here, really turning the axis so that the starting point is, what do communities aspire to be true? Why aren't those things true yet? What are the multiple scenarios that communities can imagine for themselves that could be in place that would look like prosperity for all living things? And then what are the different sets of solutions, because there's never just one solution, but what are the different sets of interwoven solutions that could help us get to that place? And then where can different social finance tools help us? But I think really starting with that center point, as others have said, is a way that I think we can continue to evolve. I want to echo what's been said about how we do the work, continuing to evolve so that how we are together is modeling the kind of connected and reciprocal and long-term and meaningful and joyful relationships that I believe can be the end goal of the worlds that we haven't yet created. And just a few things on the role of public-private partnerships. I think about this question in terms of the role that each of us as individual humans can play, the role of different actors or sectors within the partnerships, and then the partnerships overall. So I think in terms of the different actors, government and private sector at all levels can do more of what Artie's doing, can do more of coming to the table, not just with a funder hat on, but really recognizing the multiple kinds of levers that we all have to work with. I was talking to some philanthropists last week who reminded me of this, but many of us who play roles around philanthropy have the abilities to alleviate policy barriers, regulatory restrictions, and modeling the way of working with community that starts to distribute and rebalance some of the power dynamics in rooms. I think that lived experience experts and service providers can play really important roles about bringing context, about diagnosing issues, about coming up with some of these integrated suites of solutions that I mentioned. And then together, when all these different actors can really anchor in the result that they're after, not so much the tools or the tactics, but those results, and can really commit to coming to curiosity with each other about who they are as people, the different assets that they bring, and then what some of the existing constraints are that we might be able to alleviate together. That's the role that I see really powerful public-private partnerships playing.
Thank you so much, Dania. Thank you for your perspective, we would love to hear from you, Artie. What do you think about how, public partnership and the we can evolve as we're addressing systemic inequalities?
A lot of great information has been shared already, but I want to go back to what's the problem we're trying to solve here, right? Like, because really, and this is, I mentioned this at the Sustainable Finance Forum. My colleague Wayne and I had just done a blog on it as well, but systemic inequities rather, there's a lot of groups that are working in the social finance space that's really trying to address the roots of these inequities. Groups like Entrepreneur, Raven, African Canadian Farmers Fund, Windmill, ACBN, Relevant, like the list goes on. What we're going to start seeing is a deeper problem in this area as a result of the moment in time we now find ourselves in with the DEI backlash, etc. So we can address that through some of these existing sustainable initiatives that actually are there. The second problem in my mind is the inequities in the finance space itself. So traditional finance has historically been excluded, right? So marginalized groups due to factors such as race, faith, Graham's example about someone that went in and got declined, whether that's geography, gender, what have you. Community finance needs to step in where traditional finance has not. So extending access to capital and enabling economic participation. So in my mind, this is the root. If you take all the noise, this is the core issue that we're facing now. The issue is not capital. So the capital is not a problem. As Graham mentioned, there's 150 billion in assets. There's also 100 trillion in assets under management globally. It's how the capital is being deployed. As I mentioned at the forum, it's a plumbing problem. So this week alone, the world's changed again. Now we've got this overlay of complex with the tariffs, and there's a lot of things, all the more opportunities are surfacing of what can we do, what's the role of public-private partnerships in the moment of time we find ourselves in. There are two critical things. There's a lot of things flying around LinkedIn, like people coming up with great ideas. Adam Spence from SVX had talked about even creating like a Team Canada approach where you bring Indigenous civil society, labor, academia, uniting business, governments to really figure out what are the key levers that we need to change? How do we depoliticize the challenges? Every challenge is becoming politicized. We need to remove the politicization of the challenges and look at it as a whole, like as whole society, and really align our efforts towards those things. The decolonizing panel that just happened last week, great panel, by the way, if you haven't seen it, recording is probably worth it. But he talked about the political uncertainty impacting micro enterprises and immigrants, the need to understand the economic impact and the need to create more business opportunities. So I'm laying this whole context down to explain why it's even more crucial today for these public-private partnerships to come into play, right? And so when we look at things like that, how do we expand together blended finance models where philanthropy can de-risk it to attract more investments, public-private partnership? How can we make investments more transparent, standardizing metrics, for example, in sustainable finance, but also making sure that people are transparent about where they're investing their money. And I gotta say, we're not, as a foundation, we're not there yet. We're like trying to even get our portfolio aligned with our mission at this moment in time, but we're hoping to get to a place where we can be more transparent about things, right? And I think that in itself will make a difference, but also greater investment in the ecosystem infrastructure. Again, that's where I feel like very concretely, we can have great public-private partnerships that ensure that capital flows are supporting things like pool guarantees, operating reserves, investments in readiness programs. And then again, focusing on financial sector policies, and this came up as well in decolonizing wealth panel, that we need to have a greater focus on shifting policy, specifically finance policies, legislation that's impacting Indigenous people to be able to even access finance, and really, I think, decentralizing and flipping power to communities and deciding how and where capital flows, because that's how we're going to achieve better outcomes, right? If we do the same, if we continue to use the same market tools without addressing the underlying systemic issues, we're only going to replicate the existing problems. So we're going to have this new social finance space that's going to replicate everything traditional finance is doing, and we're no closer to the solution. So I have to say that we constantly need to keep the why in our minds. Why are we doing it? What's the context? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And it goes back to the underlying problem of systemic inequities, because true transformation is really going to require a rethinking of these financial models to ensure they're both effective and equitable.
Thank you so much, Adi. Thank you. Next, we're going to go to you, Mike. What role do you see the SIAC playing in evolving social finance in Canada?
Well, the Social Innovation Advisory Council was one of the 12 recommendations that the Co-Creation Steering Group made when it published its report. That was just for a bit of context for everyone, the Social Innovation Social Finance Strategy emerged in the mandate letters in 2015 when the Trudeau government was first elected. And it took a couple of years, but in 2017, there was a co-creation steering group of 15 or 16 people that was created to chart a course to say, so what does this need to look like? What needs to happen here? And they spent a year consulting with people, engaging Canadians, and produced a report that was released in 2018 called Inclusive Innovation. And I think it's a solid report. It contained 12 recommendations and said we need to take an ecosystem approach to shifting the many factors that Artie and others have talked about that actually change the game. And we're not trying to replicate the old system here with slightly nicer outcomes. We need to change the entire ecosystem that is producing the kinds of results that we're seeing today. And so the Social Innovation Advisory Council was appointed in 2023, I think. Yeah, we're coming up on 2 years now. And there's 6 of us, and our mandate is to advise on the pieces of the strategy that have been implemented, which are the Social Finance Fund, and there was 4 years of an investment readiness program, which was really around capacity building and that kind of work. And so we advised Minister Suds on how those pieces are going, what should be done around the remaining recommendations, and basically with the 6 members on the committee, sort of staying connected to communities, to stakeholders, and providing that advice. So I think there's, as people have mentioned, there's questions about this agenda. It's been, I'd say, slow progress since 2015. And what would happen if the government changed is an open question, but we keep doing our best to provide solid advice to the minister and keep things moving forward.
Thanks, Mike. Adi, this one is for you. Definity is facilitating some very remarkable work in the ecosystem. Are there any projects or initiatives you would like to amplify?
Yeah, I think, again, all our partners are the ones doing the great work, and we're just really privileged to be walking alongside them in this journey. You know, and I mentioned some of them earlier, but for example, the African Canadian Farmers Fund. So we had provided a grant. They came to us and basically said there's an issue with African farmers not being able to access capital to purchase farmlands so that they could grow their own produce and farm. And so this is now, we're talking a food issue, we're talking a health issue, we're talking economic issue. And so as a result of that, they have been looking at developing this African Canadian Farmers Fund. That's an area, I think, an initiative that still requires a lot more support. It's very, very early days. And this is the part where it's hardest to get capital in, get your data room ready, get the fund structured in a way that it's really attractive to investors. Entrepreneur, the same thing. They're doing, creating a new fund, again, very early days, related to supporting Indigenous entrepreneurs. ACBN, African Canadian, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the last 2 acronyms of what the ACBN stands for, but Thank you. And it is really for supporting more Black entrepreneurs in the space. And these are microloans. And, kudos to Inspirit. They had given them a first loss guaranteed pool that was able to deploy. But now there needs to be more structure again behind it to create a really, a really good option for people to invest in. Part of the things also, like Releva and Graham mentioned, a fund that they've just launched. We're supporting the operations of the fund so that we can bring down the operating costs. They've got a lot of knowledge and tools for the structure, but now this is now how do you deploy more investments, right? We look at Raven, Indigenous Outcomes Fund. Like Raven Indigenous Capital Partners, great fund, already funding a lot of Indigenous entrepreneurs, huge scalability. They went from 10 million to over 100 million, but now we've got this other fund, which is the Raven Indigenous Outcomes Fund, that really supports very clear outcomes related to diabetes and climate. And so how do we better support? Now this fund is more ready. So now this one is requiring more investments in the fund. And there's really a lot of opportunities. And I think there is a platform that actually showcases, because I'm sure I'm missing a lot and haven't mentioned some folks that I should be mentioning, but there is a platform that SVX, I think, has created where you could go in and see all the different opportunities that are available, because really there is many, many incredible funds that are bubbling up out there. My question really back to the audience and to you is, as these funds bubble up, is there enough? Like there's going to be such a demand to support it for all the building infrastructure, ensuring readiness, taking through the continuum. How are we going to supply that is my question. And how are we going to get ourselves ready? And I think as Michael mentioned about building the ecosystem required to support these as we are promoting them now.
Wow. No, thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you for your remarkable work. This question is for you, Graham. You have been working diligently with many other colleagues related to systems level coordination with Impact Investing Canada. Many of the primary stakeholders in the social finance ecosystem are involved in this work. Can you share where things are at with this endeavor?
Yeah, thank you so much, Clement. And if I can sneak in a little just side comment to what Artie just said before answering your question, I would just make sure that those who are listening know that that kind of support that Artie described has helped us to begin processing loans for community organizations who are taking over existing parcels of social purpose real estate and serving their local community. It's enabled us to get going on that on the front end, start with the impact rather than start with the financial model that we know doesn't work because we started with the problem. So it's getting it in that right order has actually helped us to directly begin producing those impacts even before Fund 1 is closed, which is, I think, an encouraging story. And I could tell you some of that's in the news already, and you can see it. As regards the ecosystem, and back to what Michael explained in terms of those 12 recommendations and then the who owns it part, the idea of the emerging groups, including most of the funds that you've heard here, all became part of this group called the Table of Impact Investing Practitioners. And that group was very focused on creating BOAN, which is one of the wholesalers of the Social Finance Fund. And as that happened, quite a few other pieces of the ecosystem bubbled up. And I think one of the things I think we might have learned, and I hope that granting foundations have learned this, I hope we've learned this in government, is that when you're building ecosystem, giving out small parcels of grant funding to people doing almost exactly the same thing seems like a good idea at the beginning, but can in the end cause disharmony. And we're doing a bit of a cleanup job right now to say, for each of you that's doing your own kind of thing, do you want to keep doing your own thing? Do you want to set yourself as your own nonprofit, your own charity, because there's an administrative cost with that? Or is there some way of coming together? And of course, each group is doing their own thing. They kind of care very much about the way they're doing it, but there is some room for efficiency in coming back together as well. So that's the gentle direction of travel right now, is to see if there could be a bit more coming together. Because if you go back to what Artie's saying, and she didn't exactly say it in these words, and maybe she'll correct this if I've gotten it wrong, but in terms of the big flows, like the big gas tanks, the wrong phrase, but the fuel tank of wonderful, environmentally friendly fuel that we're imagining in my metaphor here, of pouring capital into these projects. If we really want the institutional funds that are doing this for their own reasons, because it matches their investment profiles that they require, if we want them ready, we need to be more ready. We can't, the grassroots, and I think, Danya, pardon me, talking about the local stakeholder groups, this is what we love, right? This is where we know our legitimacy and power comes from. Yet at the same time, that level of breadth across that stakeholder engagement can sometimes scare away larger investors. We do need to find some time to bring some of those voices together. And that's where we're at. So very practically speaking, there are two levels. One is, how do all the social finance intermediaries talk to each other? We have a gathering that's organized by TIP on the 19th of February for all of our TIP members and friends. And that includes some who maybe drifted away a little bit, to have a day facilitated. We're very thankful to the work. Tony Pringle's group was mentioned. It's actually Jason Shukram from Quinn & Partners is going to be our facilitator on that day. And we're getting together to say, who are the social finance intermediaries? We pushed the minister hard for some additional money. ESDC and the minister announced that had to go to the wholesalers. And we've been saying, it's not about the wholesalers. We love the wholesalers, but this is about the ecosystem. So wholesalers, let's have that money out, please, for the ecosystem, not mini wholesalers. What we don't want is the ecosystem divided into three and in three different images. So one set of ecosystem looks like Capinance, one set looks like Boan, one set looks like Realize. That would be a total failure, right? So we're saying, no, there's an ecosystem, and within the ecosystem, we have funds that are seeking investment from all of those and more. That's level one. We're dealing with that on the 19th of February. I'm very excited on the 20th and 21st. We are collaborating with Spring and Catalyst and others who are talking about blended finance as a specific subject, a working subject. So not about who are we as the ecosystem, but what are we actually doing? Then the next level up is, where is it that we would talk to the Responsible Investment Association, the working group of Canadian pension funds? Where are the banks in this? Where are the insurance companies? Where could we have that conversation? But the reality is, it doesn't exist. We saw it together at the Sustainable Finance Forum, together with the environmental impact folks. So you can do the concentric circles. We said, let's get the social finance circle really working. We are also, as you probably know, in the final stages of our recruitment for a new executive director for TIP. But in order to see some of those concentric circles also to play our part in that. And that's where we are. I wish, Clement, I could just sit and tell you, you know what, it's all solved. The ecosystem of social finance and impact finance in Canada, here is a clear map. We had PricewaterhouseCoopers do some work on this pro bono for us. As you can imagine, PwC came up with the big, national and global picture. And they're right with a lot of what they wrote down. We also need to make sure that, and we know this as key stakeholder engagement professionals, that we need to get that, grassroots level right. And so we're trying to attend to that. So there's a slightly longer answer to your bigger question, but it's moving. And if there are those on this call who are not part of one of those groups or want to be part of it, they can certainly contact myself or any of the board members for TIP. Thanks.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you. Mike, this is going to be for you as part of the next round of questions. If you had a magic wand and were able to make changes to federal or provincial legislation, what would you do?
Clement, I've been waiting for this magic wand for so long. Thank you. It's better late than never, I suppose. I would say that the first recommendation of that inclusive innovation report that I mentioned earlier from the co-creation steering group, and I should give a shout out to Alison Hewitt, who is a member of that group who's on the call here today. The first recommendation was framework legislation, right? And I think this comes back to the point that the change we're talking about at an ecosystem level is so broad and systemic, it requires a broad and systemic response. And jurisdictions that have made progress on that, like Quebec or other countries, have started out by introducing legislation that sets the context and creates a lever for cross-departmental, whole of government response to moving forward. There are so many systemic forces embedding extractive capitalism in our everyday lives. And so an ecosystem shifting approach and response across the whole of government and society ultimately is what we need. Because finance sometimes, and others have said it earlier, it's a tool, of course, right? We get too focused on the tools, but it's a key tool, obviously, but it's one part of the economic shift that we need. So the co-creation steering group and the other recommendations related to procurement, related to building the evidence base, access to skills training and capacity building, awareness, legislative and regulatory change, and ensuring that all of those pieces are done in co-creation, right? In dialogue with the communities they're intended to serve, because the complex problems we're always facing are always emergent, right? There's always going to be new things cropping up. Things change so quickly, we have to adapt. So that co-creation, that dialogue process is really fundamental to, I'd say, sustainable changes. And so I think we do need to be much clearer on the outcomes and the impacts. Victoria Hirth at the Sustainable Finance Forum talked about ISO 37000 as a standard for governance of organizations. The Common Approach for Impact Measurement is, of course, accompanying the social finance fund wholesalers and social finance intermediaries to track their impacts. And in fact, nonprofit and co-op legal structures ensure an asset locked and limited returns already. So I think there's different ways of tracking outcomes and impacts that we need to keep focusing on. And the Sustainable Finance Forum, the last couple of years, talked a lot about taxonomy or for climate and transition finance. And I think I'm no expert, but I think where we need to be moving towards is a taxonomy for social finance as well, right? Start weeding out some of the social washing or greenwashing and help investors feel secure in moving capital towards vehicles that they know are going to have an impact. So that clear definition that ultimately ensures SPOs are the focus of the SISF strategy. Sorry for these acronyms, social purpose organizations. Actually are the ones benefiting from the social finance capital. So ultimately, it's about more capital in the hands of communities and results to the solutions, as Dania said, that communities identify. That would be my magic wand.
Thank you so much, Mike. Dania, what would you do with your magic wand?
I want to try to be brief. So if I had my magic wand, this wouldn't be the entirety of it. I'll just share a few things. And I'll start hyperlocal. Even though, Graham, I truly appreciate your naming the limitations of that approach. But the magic wand would first help everyone, myself included, first get obsessed with understanding their community's needs and assets and brilliance. It is so energizing, I find, and everyone I talk to who's doing local work, especially in this moment where forces beyond our direct control are so overwhelming and so oppressive, to really understand what the people around you aspire for, what they dream of, and what they can bring to that work. Asking the questions to understand what the people who are closest to you want and want to do to actualize that, and where they have barriers to doing that you might be able to help with. I think is one thing I would do if I had a magic wand. There's beauty and authentic hope in getting to know and being in partnership with the people around us right now. The second thing I would do if I could wave my wand was to be able to figure out how do we match the existing social finance dollars and an expanding amount of social finance dollars, because if others have said there's not enough right now, how do we match that not just to projects, but to really complex plans that many regions, many provinces, many hyperlocal places are building to address big transformation. The unlock, I think, to using social finance as a tool to transforming this place that we are so privileged to call home is going to be moving away from specific projects into projects that are entangled with other projects and all designed towards something that's big. So my magic wand would help us invest not just in projects, but in projects that are entangled with lots of other programs and policy levers and attempts to change people's perceptions and everything else that we know represent levers of change. And the last thing I would do with this magic wand is really try to help, again, everyone in this ecosystem really see and be supported to learn in the places they need to learn. Graham, again, you mentioned like there are these barriers to investing hyperlocal. That's real. That's something that in parts of this ecosystem we need to be able to understand and wrap our approaches around a little bit more. My colleagues here have noted, excuse my bronchitis here. My colleagues here have noted that there is work to be done to understand a lot of hows. How do we do community engagement? How do we do collaborative governance? And then how do we live into those structures once we've created them? How do we understand root causes? How do we disaggregate the data and work with those who are represented in that data, whose data, who own that data, to understand why the inequities that persist continue to persist? How do we match these new finance tools, again, not just to projects, but to really broad community needs? My magic wand would help us all to have the infrastructure in place to build the capabilities that we all know that we each need to build if social finance will be a tool for the kind of transformation that everyone here has talked about.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Artie will come to you in 2 minutes. What would you do with your magic wand, and what calls to action would you like to share with our audience today? You're
I know,
muted.
I certainly got that in a minute, but yes, thank you. I think ensuring intermediaries have the necessary infrastructure to develop and implement the innovative financial. So we've seen the will is there, the desire is there, the ideas are there. Do we have the infrastructure? So for me, is being able to allow these things to happen. The other thing is really blending philanthropic and investment capital, right? And that call to action is there are a few foundations doing this work. It's not enough. We need a lot more to be able to unlock this private capital and mobilize it. But it requires philanthropy and other partners to de-risk the investments, to be able to create, be able to support the operations, the kind of things that will actually attract those investments in. And then really from the policy perspective, I think about what if everyone could choose where they invest your RSPs and TFSAs into like on a very individual level. If I could say, oh, I want my RSP actually to go to Relevant, or I want my RSP to go to Raven, could I do that? Like, is there a world in which we can self-direct those kinds of things into these markets? I think that would be great. And then, again, as I said, just really prioritizing and resourcing the work is, I think, is critical for, it is critical for us to create the kind of thing we are all envisioning. And across sectors, across actors, being able to come together and say, let's find a different way together.
Thank you, Artie. We'll go to you, Graham. What would you do with your magic wand?
Thanks, Clement. I'm going to jump on where RT left us because when the first meeting I went to, the Responsible Investment Association, I realized that organization is really powered by the local investment advisors. That's their core group. And they are always being asked this question by what we call in Quebec, Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde, the average person who goes into that office and says, can I make my RSP? That community hub up the road, like 10C that Julia Grady leads, a great organization. Can I have my RSP invested in that? And they say, sorry, we don't have that at our bank. Think, well, get it, figure this out, darn it. This has got to be done. It's been too long for going on that. That's number one, is that getting into the hands of the average person is absolutely key. Number two, we've talked about it a lot here. We have not mentioned the word conservative or conservative party. We haven't mentioned the word Republican Party. Let's just stick with conservative party. One of the love languages there is small business. And you know what? We know that small businesses, small enterprises, micro enterprises, enterprises started by new Canadians, they are very friendly to what we would call SPOs. We are very close cousins. We could actually be even closer and realize many of these outcomes can be created by those kinds of businesses. And I think we could actually learn to live better with those types of startup businesses. The final thing I'll say is we need bond issuances at a bigger level. And I mentioned the letters that I write early in the morning. The one I wrote late last night I might publish it later on, actually. It's my advice to the Liberal Party, the NDP, and the Conservative Party. And one of them is build. If Mark Carney gets, it looks like that's the way it's going to go. I think Canadians are looking for what is a really big vision for East-West that could really work as we're hammered on the North-South. What are some big infrastructure projects that could be envisioned? And how could we work, but we can fix heaters? If I could wave a magic wand, and I do in my prayers every day. I don't wave a magic wand, but I pray in another way. But I would do that. And so I pray we could get together and I just love the vision of SETSI behind this gathering that encourages these kinds of conversations. And as crazy as they are, isn't it good for our mental health to be able to speak these things out? And I think Dania said this right from the beginning, like, yes, there are crazy things that aren't happening, but this is happening. And let's speak the reality that this is where we're trying to get to. Let's keep speaking it into each other. And for those who are on the call, be encouraged. You are not quite as crazy as that most negative person is around you. And we can do this, we can get there. And it's just a privilege to be with you all today. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Michael, do you have any closing thoughts you would like to share?
And that systemic
Right.
analysis with tactical immediate opportunities for specific wins. So let's keep building, and there's going to be opportunities, right? And this, Naomi Klein talked about disaster capitalism, Friedman's thesis, right? The changes that are coming are going to create opportunities. We need to seize them, and that's regardless of politics. Mitzi Hunter from the Canadian Women's Foundation at the Sustainable Finance Forum said that there's going to be a doubling of investment resources controlled by women, up to $4 trillion over the next few years. That's just demographics, right? That's not politics. And that's going to mean different investment choices that are coming. So I would invite people to stay connected, to support the intermediaries that I already mentioned, doing field building work like TIP, Catalyst, Tamarack, SEDNet, and others, and persevere. Just remember, Victor sent me a video of Anand Garidas, who wrote Winners Take All and Persuaders, saying that we're on the winning side of history. Right? If you look at the last century, we are winning. There's been a lot more progress on social than economic, right? So I'd say, but let's stay positive. Those of us who want liberty and justice for more people are the winning team. So stay positive, continue to build and grow. And as I've heard Selena Caesar-Chavannes, the new executive director of SEDNet, say, let's democratize love and joy to support each other. As you said, Graham, keep building together.
Thank you so much, Michael. We'll go straight to Dania. Closing thoughts from you.
I want to go back to something that Victor Beausoleil said on a webinar that we did maybe in 2022, early 2023 maybe. Victor, you said social finance is a movement that covers various ways of making investments to achieve environmental and social impact. I have been thinking so much about movements. Today is February 3rd. It is the third day of Black History Month, of Black Futures Month. I cannot help but think of Dr. Martin Luther King and all the others who 58 years ago started the Poor People's Campaign. I was in conversation on Friday. It was a great moment of serendipity with an 88-year-old man and a 91-year-old man, and had the great privilege to hear from them about the civil rights movement and other movements that have happened over these last many, many decades. Now is the time for a movement. Social finance is a part of it. And my final words are just such deep gratitude to all of you, and hope that we can continue working together to build the movement that will help everyone who's furthest from opportunity right now, and all of us to be able to live in a world where we all prosper. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dania. Artie, any closing thoughts from you?
Anyway, yeah, I just echoing my fellow panelists to say that, I think it's time where we come together, we leave the bridges behind, we leave the borders in our minds behind, and really come together and seize the opportunities ahead of us. Because everything I've heard on this call and in this panel this week speak to opportunities, but we can't do it alone, right? It's about coming together and working together, aligning our efforts, dispelling myths, engaging a new generation of mission-driven investors, rethinking how we use these market tools in bold and innovative ways. To me, I think this is the year of coming together and being really bold and doing great work to advance this field.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Artie. We'll get final thoughts from Graham before we close.
Be encouraged. Don't give up. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Graham. Thank you so much for your consistent leadership and for your time and for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. As always, we close the session by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stewards whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. We thank everyone who have come to share their time with us. And our closing panel, we thank our guests. We thank all the listeners. We've come to the end of the People's Social Impact Conference, and have a wonderful rest of your day. We appreciate you all. Thank you.